Also the plot that Marty saves his father from being hit by the car of his mother's father, thereby getting hit by it himself, causing her to take pity on him instead of his father, causing her to fall in love with him instead of his father, is really clever because it creates such a dramatic conflict. We have a mother being in love with her son, and the biggest mistake Marty could ever possibly make is erasing his own existence, and that's what he almost does here. So we've got a very dramatic conflict of that the mother falls in love with her own son, and someone through accident almost erases his own existence. It really uses time travel paradoxes very well, and since it's soon to be permanent, this creates a really lot of tension, and it creates a really strong ticking time bomb, because it's still unclear what will happen now, but if these events take a permanent course, then he's doomed, and he can't do anything about it anymore, so has a limited time span to act. And it's further made tensionful by the fact that he has to be finished before a certain time to go to the clock tower to get the lightning, to travel back and go back to the future. And hereby the stakes are really dramatic, and the two plots intertwine, creating a real time limit and creating really a lot of complexity and really a lot of tension. And it's of course also really dangerous for him to not get back in time, otherwise he'd be stuck in a world he doesn't belong in, and he would also lose all the people he loves. And it's also very interesting that Biff is also hitting on her, and that the bullies who bullies his father around here is the same he bullies in the present, and that he constantly tries to harass Marty's mother Lorraine, and that he keeps Marty's father George away from her, because this also adds even more tension when Marty because when Marty saves her. This also adds even more tension because this makes it even more difficult for George to date her, and when then Marty tries to save her from Biff, because he's a lot braver than his father, this only makes her love him more and his father less, and creates even more tension. And so this plot is really dramatic with really high stakes. Get your parents back together, or you and your brother and your sister disappear forever. And it's very fake, and Marty first gets his mother to fall in love with him, and then he tries to introduce George, but he fails, which is very believable because his mother's protective instinct is now completely aimed at him. Then he has to, and so that's a really clever twist as well. And then he has to pursue him and has to force George to ask her out, but he doesn't want to because he doesn't feel ready for girls yet. So he has to blackmail him, which is of course really clever by using a very loud sound for a headphone and putting this up while he sleeps. He managed to completely surprises him and completely scare him, and by dressing up in his radioactive suit, he managed to look like an alien and blackmail him into asking her out, which is of course really clever because in that time not many people had seen such radioactive suits, and this really made you look like an alien and really scared people, and therefore you could really successfully blackmail them. And of course the surprise of the sound helps in that as well. He says that he is from the planet Vulcan, and that he will melt his brain, and since George is spineless, he of course falls for the plan, and he tries to ask Lorraine out. But Biff harasses her, which is a really clever twist, showing that one of the most beautiful girls gets arrested, because that could of course really happen, and it adds to the tension even more. And it, by the way, especially happened in the time. And he then eventually also attacks George, and Marty hits him, and then Marty already tried to protect his mother in early time, which is really believable because he really stands up for the people he loves. Therefore that was a clever twist, and Biff cut him a break because he was new, but then eventually he just tries to protect his mother again when Biff harasses her again, and of course then he gets really angry, and he especially tried to protect his mother since he and fight Biff since he also attacked his father. So that was a really clever twist as well. It's then very smart that Biff gets angry and that he then has to run away, and that he also has to create a skateboard out of a kid's toy because he knows how to what skateboards are out of his time, which is once again a very clever time paradox. And he skates very fast and causes Biff to crash into a truck of manure. And this causes Lorraine to adore him even more and ask him out for a date to the dance, where she was to go with his father. And this is really smart because it shows that because Marty needs to protect his mother, because his father is too spineless, it only makes her further love him, which makes sense because she likes strong men. And it's a very clever idea if you think about it, because it shows that if a father doesn't take care of his wife well, then the only person who can do that is his son, and that really creates a smart paradox here. So now he wants to pretend to arrest her so George can save her, but he feels of course very uncomfortable harassing his mother and faking an attack on her, so that and planning with George that he can save her, because, well, it is his mother, and it's of course really difficult to pretend to arrest your mother. That's of course a very clever twist, because yeah, it's your mother, and yeah, you feel very awkward arresting her. So that was a very smart twist as well. And it's also very smart that she actually already tries to kiss him, that they both feel very uncomfortable, since even she instinctively realizes that he is like her brother. And this is of course really deep and very natural, that your instinct would tell you that kissing your son is wrong even when you don't know it's your son. That you could instinctively feel that. And then Biff arrives, interrupting Marty's plan, and has his friends throw him in the back of the car. But this is the car of many big black musicians who are very powerful and who chase them off, and therefore free Marty. And that's a very smart twist as well, that because these guys don't think through the plan and just randomly mutilate someone's car, they could get into trouble, because these people turn out to be numerous and very strong. It shows that arrogance can completely become your downfall. And what's really smart, what adds to this meanwhile as well, is that it's almost too late, because Biff wants to rape Lorraine, that Marty isn't able to come to her in time, and this forces George to stand up for her, or else he would allow Lorraine to be violated, and this puts him in a position that he has to be brave to stand up for the people he loves. And that really teaches him to be a stronger person, and that actually plays into Marty's plan, because he then actually decides to be brave, and that's completely believable and clever. And he decides that he can't leave Lorraine to be raped, so he hits Biff, saving Lorraine. And then he saves her from another punk at the dance, fully realizing that he's a braver and stronger person now, and he decides to kiss her. Which is also a really dramatic scene, because he almost allows this punk to steal her from him, and Marty, due to that, almost disappears, and he actually sees his own arm disappearing. But he succeeds, and Marty then gets his arm back and plays the rock and roll music. Because he needed to replace the original guitar player, because the original guitar player cut his hand trying to cut him out of the back of the car. And since he knows rock and roll from the future, he invents it here, and this once again creates a really smart paradox, showing a rock and roll fan creating rock and roll. And also his father was always very insecure, not standing up against Biff, and not following his dreams of becoming a science fiction writer either, not showing anyone because he was too afraid to get rejected, and now he has the courage to go through with it, becoming a famous writer. Marty's family finally becomes rich, and Marty himself becomes braver, finally becoming a big rock and roll player, and Biff in the future is spineless now and works for George and has become a nice guy. So he got what he deserved now, and that's of course really believable, that after someone horribly beat him up, showing he wasn't that strong, he would completely become a coward, and it's believable that Marty would become a lot braver, seeing his father stand up to his mother this way, stand up to Biff this way, proving that people can grow stronger. And what's also interesting is that he now has a lesser life, because he can't live off others, and at the same time has learned his lesson, so that he now sees how wrong it is to use people now that they've stand up to him. That's very believable, since it happens a lot in real life. And the Libyans also crashed, because he was crashing into a building right before he was saved by traveling back in time, and therefore they crashed and it killed them. It's believable that he would almost crash into a building, and that he would be saved by being traveled back in time, and so that the Libyans would then crash, because obviously they couldn't see the building because he was running in front of them. And so it's all well resolved, because Biff is stopped, and Marty and his mom don't come together, and instead Marty's father and his mother once again come together, and everything is as it should be. Marty gets back to the present, and his father's now rich and happy, and he follows his dream, and the future has been saved and is better. And there was yet another very dramatic and complex subplot, which is also really great about this film, how there are multiple plot lines which are all very thick and clever, and which all tie together well, and which make the film even more complex and even more dramatic, which is the subplot of the fact that Doc actually got shot by the Libyans, forcing Marty to go back in time, which is a very dramatic death, obviously, in the beginning of the film, and which helps create tension and sadness when we see Marty meet a younger Doc, and he tries to tell Doc about this, who actually already sees a part of the event on video and decides that he doesn't want to know about it since he doesn't want to change the future, which is very believable because he as a scientist believes in being very safe with time, of course, which was of course a really clever twist as well. And it's very clever that when he watched Marty's tape of how he got here, he would accidentally come across it and see that there's something fishy, and they would therefore especially not want to know about it. And of course Marty, as a very kind and straightforward guy, would want to help him since he thinks that he deserves to live, and so he tries to tell him about this, and he actually, but Doc won't listen, and eventually he writes him a letter, and it's believable Doc won't listen since he thinks it's very dangerous and doesn't realize that he will die. And eventually he writes him a letter which he tears apart, and then he wants to tell him, but due to the heaviness of the storm, Doc has to leave, and he doesn't hear him, and he doesn't get a chance to tell him, which is very believable, because since the lightning would strike, he wouldn't get a chance to tell him. And so then he tries to go back earlier, but the car malfunctions, which is believable considering all the damage it's been through, so that's a clever twist as well, as was the previous twist. And so then he isn't able to get back in time either, and he thinks Doc still dies. But what's interesting is that he decided he was too curious, and that he was willing to trust Marty since he was a friend, and that he therefore totally put the ladder back together, which is also a very clever twist that he could do that since he's so smart. And he therefore found out what would happen and wore a bulletproof vest, thereby making for a very happy reunion. And now Doc's story also comes to an end. So now he finally gets the chance to travel to the future, thereby making for a very sad goodbye, where both of the characters have happy futures, but they have to part in spite of caring a lot about each other. What's very interesting is that eventually Doc returns and takes Marty and his girlfriend Jennifer to the future to do something about his kids, which is of course a very smart and dramatic ending, because it adds a lot of excitement about what will happen. And he takes them in a flying car which uses garbage as fuel, adding really a lot of imagination to the film of what the future is like. But at least we know they're fine and that this story is over, so we have got a finished story and the film works on its own, but we also have got a very exciting cliffhanger for a possible next film, even though it isn't necessary since it's also very comedic. It creates a lot of anticipation as we don't see the future. And so it's still a very happy ending, and it creates an opening for a new issue, so it's finished perfectly and it's satisfying, yet open and exciting and perfect for a sequel. So the plot was immensely well done. And also, what's interesting is that the film has a really nice, plausible, realistic time travel logic. Marty is the only one with a time machine and can't use it, so there's no plot hole of why it isn't used more often. And all the paradoxes start somewhere, and the consequences are consistent, and everything works circularly. So it all has a consistent logic. And also Marty tried to use the time machine to go back in time to save Doc, but the car malfunctioned, so it wasn't a plot hole of why he didn't use the time machine.